welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today I want to talk about bases, specifically my 6 takeaways from the first ever Base Off. For those not on Smashposting, Base Off was an extremely low-stakes bracket tournament where I chose 16 of my favorite bases, put them in a bracket, asked the public to vote on who advances, and immediately became emotionally invested as democracy failed me time and time again. Storyteller's Hut won the entire bracket, and though I haven't committed to what is my favorite base, Storyteller's Hut would probably be my number 1 seed in such a format, even though the seeds were chosen randomly. Lately, I find myself obsessed with creating bases, despite the 2 key irreconcilable differences about bases. Players will never agree on which bases to use in a game, as a large population of the player base does whatever they want, despite the fact that I find one of those methods highly problematic, largely due to the second debate. Players will never agree on whether a base should favor its faction. There is this notion that bases belong to a faction, that they should help their faction most, and that simply isn't true. It sometimes feels like it's true, particularly in egregious cases, but what is often forgotten is that the more the statement is true, the worse it usually is for the game. I'm looking at you especially, Workshop. I find the second debate even more curious because a base ability can literally be anything. You have infinite room to do whatever works best in an isolated context. Deepreef Crag, the base that literally has no faction, did really well, and it's a crystal clear proof of concept that a standalone base pack would be extremely welcome. And this ties in directly with my first takeaway. My favorite bases are by far and large the ones that have nothing to do with their faction explicitly. And though this is speculation on my part, given that the majority of contests were quite close, I think more people believe that too than they realize. These may be inspired by their factions, but they don't have a tremendous home court advantage. Looking at the candidates, the closest that comes is Pyramids, but that is more about the fact that the Egyptian state machine is wrong, and Pyramids doesn't give an advantage so much as level the playing field, and Pyramids is great for literally everyone. Consider Ryla, which got extremely far. That's a terrible base for Minions of Cthulhu. They have less minions to start with, only 8, and 4 of them already blow themselves up. So what are you going to sacrifice, a star spawn? Standing stones for werewolves would be just +1 power, and infinitely more meaningful to everyone else. Prior to the Great Talent Killer, if you were told Standing Stones was a werewolf base, you'd say why. But if it were a standalone base, you'd be really excited. This really reinforces that we took thematic inspiration and retroactively slapped on expectations of mechanical advantage. To be fair, I think part of the problem is that most faction-centric bases are either bad or boring. You'll notice a lack of Disney bases in this list, because they feel like they were generated by AI. In the Discord, we often joke about bases that are essentially worded like, after you do the thing you already do, draw a card, gain a power counter, or do it slightly better. You don't fall into that trap when you need to think of something completely standalone, and if the game just magically started sprinkling in more and more factionless bases, I wonder if people would even notice before they replaced faction bases entirely. The second takeaway that really surprised me is that Ryla is really, really popular. It's not just popular, but popular for an unexpected reason. One I dare say is wrong. In the past, I referred to Ryla as a VP farming base, a mistake I won't be making anymore. I think you can get 1 VP from Ryla. Maybe with the right toolset, you can get 2. Any more than that, and I have questions as to what is going on, especially if everyone is farming. And it's weird because I clearly like Ryla enough to put it in the bracket, but I found myself begging for it to lose, and it kept on winning. What's interesting about Ryla is that it is less a VP farming base and more a dynamic VP spread. It can be a 5-2-1 base. It can be a 4-3-1 base. It can be 5-3-2 or 5-3-1, depending on where the extra VP goes. That is what makes it interesting to me, specifically hoping that I could find some way to sacrifice a recruit for a VP and still win the base in the same turn to maximize my payoff. There were a few instances where players did not realize that the destruction must actually occur to gain a VP, which otherwise would be bad. In fact, consider the extreme. If players can get a point every turn, that's not good. It's not as fast as breaking bases, but it's still not good. Still, if a base is going to award conditional VP, Ryla does it best, and its popularity is more apparent than ever. The next takeaway is the surprising popularity of Jungle Oasis, which is completely out of alignment with the recent goals of the game. For the record, I am clearly on Team Jungle Oasis. We need more 200 bases. I've said that before, and I will say it long after we get a 4th one. In recent years, this notion of speeding the game up keeps coming up, and I just don't understand it. Making the game too quick makes the winner be whoever drew better. But if players really like Jungle Oasis, why haven't we seen more of those bases in the game? Maybe it's because no one is asking for our opinion, or maybe it has to do with the dynamics of the game. Besides the already stated game speed up, I think there are a few reasons. First, these bases don't work as well in multiplayer on paper, even though I think they are more interesting in multiplayer. I say they don't work well on paper because only one player is gaining VP, but what that means is that it is catch-up VP. The more players there are in the game, the more valuable unanswered points should be. And the second part is that unanswered points may be undervalued. While 2 points is not as good as 4 points, it is still a spread of 2, but it's a safe increase. Too many times in my many games of Smash Up, the game has felt mathematically over. There is no base where a player can win and continue the game. Yes, I often play to be able to win by losing on second place, but there should be an answer to that, and 200 bases are the answer. It genuinely surprises me that we have 5 ninja bases and only 3 200 bases, one of which is buried in Munchkin, and the other of which has a breakpoint too high. I think the third reason we don't see 200 bases is because the game doesn't know what ability to give them. This ties into a common criticism about Jungle Oasis, that it is boring. In reality, Jungle Oasis' ability is its catch-up VP nature and its seemingly perfect breakpoint. While I myself won't play a leader there unless I really need to, I do find myself worrying less about power to VP ratios and more about turn to VP ratio. If I could get 2 points in a single turn, that is really appealing. If this tournament did nothing else but show the feasibility of a 200 base and we get another one soon, that alone might have been worth it. My fourth takeaway was that there is a category of bases that wasn't well represented in Base Off, and those are Uno bases. Bases with universally negative outcomes. These are bases that, instead of providing something good, do something bad for everyone. The only Uno base on my list was Sonus Moon, and it lost pretty decisively to Jungle Oasis. This to me is an opportunity for the game, because Uno bases are an important paradigm shift. Negative abilities become opportunities when viewed through a certain perspective. Worm's Desolation is often viewed as a bad base, but it is great for engines, it favors singularly powerful minions, and can become a surprise solo if played carefully. And I'm not even that bullish on Worm's Desolation. I just think Unos like Q-Point provide an opportunity for new tactics and approaches rather than C-base smash base. The takeaway here is a question. There aren't that many Unos to begin with, so are they not well represented on the list because of their low quantity, or do players generally not like the ones we have? Is there a general opposition to the idea of a negative base? Unos are therefore an opportunity to shake things up, and like 200 bases, they should be given priority in the next set. The next takeaway is essentially the opposite of Uno bases, and this is one of the biggest stories during the 15-day bracket, culminating in Faceless City squaring off against Woodland Cottage. Except in rare cases, Woodland Cottage has the stronger ability. But does that make it the better ability? Are better abilities better for the game? The answer isn't always yes. Bases should have the right ability, not the most powerful version of it. This is best explained by exaggeration. Take Longhouse, a base not many people like. Outside of movement, you do it 1 time, and it's annoying cost for 2 power. What if it were 3 power? That may make it worth it. But if you made it 10 power, that would clearly be better than 2 or 3, but definitely not better for the game. I often point to Exospace as one of my least favorite bases, because 2 per minion is an extreme benefit to movement-centric factions, and I've seen them shatter this base in an instant. If you are a movement faction, you are already spread out, so it's extremely common for Exospace to enter play and break that player's turn for a solo because +2 is too good. And though I am not surprised that Woodland Cottage won, and again I really like that one, Faceless City to me is clearly the better base for the game. With Faceless City, the minion you play matters. You can only grab what you play. For Woodland Cottage, you can grab almost anything. Woodland Cottage means a lot more to unique minions, which is a trend I've really soured on, because you can play anything and grab anything, which encourages spamming rather than thoughtful play. And spamming isn't generally a word I try to incentivize through design. I think that the VP spreads also play a factor. Because you can play anything on Woodland Cottage, you are completely incentivized to play a small minion there because the reward is low anyway, and if it gets destroyed, you only lose 1 point. Whereas Faceless City incentivizes you to play a 4, but at least you get 2 points per second, and it just feels more cohesive overall. So is Woodland Cottage a better base for the game? I think the answer is no, but a lot of players clearly feel the answer is yes, and it will be interesting to see how this notion plays out over the coming expansions. My final takeaway is something that I knew would occur, but was completely surprised by how blatant it would be. There was one new base that entered the fray, Building Rooftop. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, because I love all these bases. They were specifically chosen, out of a large group. But Building Rooftop got a lot of novelty votes that I'm not sure are earned. Building Rooftop is a very interesting base, again, because of VP approximation. It's essentially Ancient Temple, with more restrictions, but a VP incentive that allows the base to become, you guessed it, Ancient Temple. Storyteller's Hut won somewhat decisively against Ancient Temple, but Storyteller's Hut barely edged out Building Rooftop. How do you explain that other than recency bias? Building Rooftop is very difficult to trigger outside of action heroes, but it remains interesting anyway, particularly from the second and third VP slots. What makes this base interesting is Titans with power, waste strategies, and second place strategies. I actually think this base has a greater likelihood of being a 3-2-1 instead of being a 4-2-1 or even a 4-1-1. Like Ryla, it's the variance that makes the base interesting, even though it is a much stricter condition. Pick an average faction. Let's say you put a leader there for 5 power. Would the second player respond with the leader? No, because that would put the base 5 away from scoring and burn your leader for second place. So Building Rooftop simultaneously encourages the first player to play high, but other players to play low, much like Ancient Temple. But the breakpoint reduction means that it is that much more risky. I think the best case for Building Rooftop is actually specials-based movement. In my Action Heroes Tornado game, I had some really interesting choices. I can play Picked Up to kick off your only minion to go from 2 to 0, or I can play another 5 and kick myself off to increase my VP and use turn tempo to my advantage. These are the type of decisions that make Building Rooftop really interesting, and I look forward to getting legitimate attention for these reasons rather than just being new. Bases represent a design landscape where creativity can reign supreme if you are willing to look past the biases of being faction-centric. Even though there is little meaning in winning base-off, I still learned a lot by setting it up and watching your participation, and it's important to get more perspectives on a crucial aspect of this game. I hope that the lessons of base-off can be utilized in the upcoming expansions. What's your favorite base overall and why? Especially if it wasn't on my list of 16, let me know in the comments, which is also where you can find the full results. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.